On this edition of the Table of Content, we are joined by Christopher Reibold. He is a Catholic writer, and we'll get to hear about his particular love for the saints and how that's translated over to some of his writings, and also how he has come to be a part of We Are One Body Audio Theater. Stay tuned. That's all coming up next, right here on the Table of Content. Thanks so much for being with us for this episode of the Table of Content. I am your host, Albert Sines, and we have the pleasure of being joined today by Christopher Reibold, a Catholic writer. Christopher, thanks so much for being with us.
Oh, thanks for having me.
So I'm going to kick off to you real fast here so you can go ahead and let the listeners know a little bit more about yourself and your background and how you came to where you are now.
Okay, thank you. I grew up in what I would describe as a nominally Catholic home. I was a bright kid. I read a lot. By the time I was 13, it seemed self-evident to me that virgin births and people rising from the dead were the stuff of folklore and fairy tale. I had a lot of questions. I didn't get good answers, and so I declined to make my confirmation. By the time I was 16 or 17, I had stopped attending Mass. I was, I was away from the church for about 30 years. Circumstances in my life were such that I decided to make a career change. I decided to move back here to Pennsylvania to be closer to my family. And in the process, kind of getting out of a situation that was stressful and that I needed to leave and getting back here to where I had family and friends and some emotional support that I needed at the time. It was an opportunity for me to kind of reflect and take a little stock. And one of the things I kind of discovered just as I was unpacking and looking at my bookshelves was that I had read many books about the saints. I had a kind of blind spot about it, I suppose. If you'd asked me, I probably would have said, well, yeah, I read The Wisdom of the Desert, or I read G.K. Chesterton's biography of Francis of Assisi, or that sort of thing. But I didn't consciously appreciate how the saints had always been a part of my reading. And that was kind of eye-opening for me. It wasn't long after that I made the decision to go to Mass. And then I just kept going. And that fall, that was 2013, I enrolled in the RCIA program at my local parish, and I was confirmed at Easter of 2014. I'd always wanted to write. I found myself writing about the saints, inspired by the saints. They played such an important role in my decision to return to the church. It's really, I guess that's really how I was catechized, was reading about the lives and experiences of the saints. And I thought, well, if they could do that for me, they could do that for others. So that was kind of how the subject matter came to be. I found myself writing these little pieces that, they worked a bit like the old Paul Harvey radio segment, The Rest of the Story, if you're old enough to remember that.
Sure.
But where he would dramatize some event in the life of a famous person, but he wouldn't tell you what he was talking about until he got to the end, and then he would say, now you know the rest of the story. And I was writing these little anecdotal pieces, these little descriptive pieces about some event in the life of one of the saints, and I thought, well, they would make good radio content. They'd be good material for a radio station to use if the Mass doesn't conclude right on the quarter hour or whatever, and you've got some time you need to fill before the next program starts, that sort of thing. So I started reaching out to Catholic radio stations to see if anybody was interested in this. And I just reached out to Father Boniface, and we ended up meeting and becoming friends. And that's how I initially connected with WAOB Audio Theater. And they were just getting started at the time, and they were looking for content. And so we took some of the anecdotal pieces that I had done, and we developed them into a little bit longer. I mean, still short stories, but 20-minute stories. And that provided some of the initial content for WAOB Audio Theater. I guess that's my story. Is there something that I can speak to?
Well, I guess I'm interested in the fact that it was. I want to get to your writings, but I'm interested in your kind of history and how you said that you were sort of unassumingly reading about the saints, how you hadn't quite realized that it was really a part of your readings, and how that was sort of your, I guess we'll call it a springboard for potentially helping to lead you back into the church. And I'm curious, just for the listeners, if you could maybe expand a bit more upon what it was about the saints, what it was about their lives that sort of intrigued you and sort of lured you back in.
Yeah, I think I'm still working on the answer to that question all these years later. I think there are certain things that occur in the lives of the saints that sort of resonate with me. Um, for example, we often see this sort of reverse Horatio Alger thing. You know, in the secular world, we have this story of the self-made man, the person who pulled himself up by his bootstraps and went on to become a millionaire, and that's kind of the one of the inspirational stories we tell. But in the lives of the saints, we see exactly the opposite over and over again. We see people born into lives of wealth and privilege who walk away from that to go do the thing they felt called to do, which is in many cases is a really hard form of service. And some of them are well, they're just quirky and interesting stories. I like Angus the Chaldee, for example, is probably not well known, but kind of an inspirational figure to me. He was basically passed on being king of Ireland so that he could go be a monk and serve anonymously in this monastery. And at the time, there really weren't schools in Ireland. If you came from an upper class background and you were a boy, then sometimes you would be sent to the monastery to study. And he actually outed himself unintentionally because he got caught teaching a student to read. Working with him and tutoring him was the thing that caused the abbot to pay attention to him and realize that this monk was more than a local who had been brought in to work in the fields. So it's just those kinds of interesting stories. He goes on to write some of the important Irish histories. His writings are a source of our knowledge of that, a primary source of our knowledge of that period of Irish history. And then some of them, I'll just real quick, I'll tell the story of Romanus of Le Mans. There's another saint that is very important at one point in church history, but is not well known today. Romanus, his uncle Julian was the bishop of Le Mans, the town in France where they have the Grand Prix every year. And Romanus he's described in the surviving literature as like scatterbrained and dim-witted and unable to put his thoughts into words. He may have had a speech impediment. We can't diagnose him from 1,700 years after the fact, but it wouldn't surprise me if we'd have some kind of label for him today. And yet, Uncle Julian ordained him and sent him to preach in these waterfront towns along the Gironde River estuary. And of course, today these are beautiful tourist towns. They're known for their wine. This is Bordeaux region of France, so they're known for their wines. They're known for their surviving medieval architecture. They're known for their wildlife refuge. But in the 4th century, these were busy Roman ports. These were the bar scene from Star Wars, and into these wretched hives of scum and villainy to steal a line from Obi-Wan. It goes Romanus, right, to tell everybody about Jesus. Well, you can imagine how well that went. It didn't go well at all. But Romanus was persistent. He just get up, go in the next day, and do it again. And when combined with his sincerity, when combined with his humility, when combined with his persistence, all of the characteristics about him, his social awkwardness, his appearance, his speech difficulties, they became the very things that endeared him to people. And attitudes in these waterfront towns changed. He became a very popular figure and a very important evangelist. We think that he may have made as many as 40,000 converts over the course of his career, which, he remains to this day one of the most successful evangelists in the history of the church. And I remember, kind of coming across that story. I was at a point in my life where I'd left my corporate career. I'd made the decision to come back to the church, but I had a lot of questions about what I was going to do next, and trying to find a way to employ my talents. It's shocking how many things I am not good at. And, Romanus really reminded me, or really pointed out to me, that we're endowed with exactly the characteristics that we're meant to have, or that we need to have to play the role that we're meant to play in the kingdom of God. I remember when I first started toying with the idea of getting up in front of people and telling stories live, I kept thinking, well, I need to find a partner, right? I can do the research and the writing and that sort of thing, but I need to find somebody who's tall and charismatic and has stage presence, and I'm not that person. But I have found that that's exactly what makes my storytelling work. It's just, I think people sense that I'm moved by these stories, and I find them inspirational, and they were my route back to the church, and I think that's a big part of the appeal.
I appreciate that comment that you made, that you felt like you needed someone who was different to tell the stories, but yet it came to be you, and that's what's made the most impact. I've seen on different occasions in my experience of my faith where people who you wouldn't say, well, that's not the right person for this particular ministry, for any number of reasons, yet they seem to be just the exact person that was needed, whether it was through some trial of their own life or just really who they are in comparison to who they're working with.
Yeah.
So I think God works with the person or persons and their particular set of skills or lack of skills to make a moment of, we'll say, evangelization work really well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think we're very blessed in the Catholic Church to have really good scholars and apologists, and we need those. But those guys are writing dozens of really good books every year that millions of people are not reading, and
right.
We need something to. There needs to be a pop culture side to this as well. There needs to be a way to pique people's interest, to start a conversation, to get. I consider it a real success if I do my and that leads somebody to go read a Scott Hahn book or a Brant Petrie book or a Mike Aquilina book, and that's how I see my role. I'm not a priest. I'm not a theologian or scholar. I'm just this guy who found his way back to the church via the saints. And I love these stories, and I want to tell them to other people. And I am finding that there's an audience for that. That some of the people who come to see me have actually stopped me afterwards to tell me that they came because I'm a storyteller, and they didn't feel like they would be intimidated or have a lot of theological concepts thrown at them that they don't have the background to understand. And so that's where I fit in. I'm front end. I'm about storytelling. I'm an entertainer, and I'm trying to get people excited. I'm trying to find ways to get people interested in Catholicism broadly, with the saints as my primary kind of vehicle. We have a local parish here that rescued a bunch of beautiful statues from an old convent, and they actually have a campus layout. It's I think they have 5 acres. It's a pretty big piece of property, and they've put these statues up, with paths connecting them, and at each place there's a bench and that kind of thing. So you can do this little walk around the campus. And from time to time, they have me in to lead saint walks. So we'll go from statue to statue, and I'll tell them who this person, tell everybody who this person was, and tell a couple little stories about him. Just a lot of it is standard biography. Some of it is just personally what they've come to mean to me. Some of it's just trivia. The fact that Francis of Assisi had a great singing voice, for example, and hated school, or just things that are interesting to know and help to humanize him. I think we do have a problem sometimes with having reduced the saints to kind of two-dimensional figures, and
Sure.
that's a great way. That kind of, let's go for a walk and let's take a few minutes at each statue and tell the story. That's a great way to kind of get people thinking and get people engaged.
Now let's talk specifically here for a few minutes about audio theater. So you reached out, you met Father Boniface, then you were sort of linked into audio theater in the early stages. They were looking for content, so you started sharing your stories with them, and they've obviously been recorded by multiple people retelling your stories. And I'm curious, from your standpoint, how has that been for you to hear your stories sort of brought to life in audio theater?
Oh yeah, well it's a lot of fun. I Audio theater is great on a number of different levels, but for me primarily it's just an opportunity to get together with other creative people who are thinking about how storytelling can be used to evangelize. And so it's been a really good opportunity for me. I'm always thrilled to have somebody read a story or to be invited to read one. I've done a fair amount of voice work for them, for projects that were not necessarily my own, and that's been a great experience as well. So it's again, it's about having some opportunity to interact with other people who, of course, share the faith and want to evangelize in a particular kind of way. And so I enjoy it. I'm happy to hear other people read my stories. And if they've got a better way to tell it, that's great. So it's just a lot of fun.
We've been trying to take some of the content that was recorded previously, even if it was several years ago, and try to bring some new life into it. And we've done a couple of your stories and sort of revisited the stories and now started to add like sound effects to them. And we've worked on over just at the end of last year, we worked on the Angel's Door, and we worked on the hunting party. And to kind of listen to it again and work through the sound effects and listen to it now, it certainly adds, it's been fun sort of as the story has been given even more life and more energy than it had been just when it was recorded. And that was a great story to begin with.
Yeah, I think my favorite is probably the old churchyard by the sea, the story about Saint Brona, who was a disciple of Saint Patrick. She gathered together a number of women religious and along the coast of County Down. And in her day, that was an area where there were a lot of shipwrecks. And literally, they lived their vocation by operating a life-saving station and by becoming expert at rescuing drowning sailors in the wake of storms. And the legend goes that at some point the abbey acquired a bell, and that they discovered that if they rang the bell, it could be heard by the ships just offshore. And so if the ships heard the bell, they knew they were dangerously close to the rocks. And you think, well, it's a good little story, and there's a story. There's a component of the legend that it could be heard ringing on stormy nights long after there was anyone around to ring it. But in the 19th century, when a tree came down in the churchyard, encased inside it, they did find an ancient bronze bell. So that kind of stuff. I just really get interested in where in areas where the information comes to light that supports the legend. I love the idea of a group of women religious living out their vocation in such a unique and interesting way. So that was an early one too, and probably my favorite of the ones that have had sound effects and other enhancements added to them.
Super. Now, before we run out of time, I wanna talk with you about a book that you wrote. You wrote a book called "The Saints at the Chapel: Thrilling Tales of History's Holiest Heroes." Now, I don't know personally if that's your only work, but I wanted to focus on it because we've been talking about the saints. And I was wondering if you could give just a little synopsis of what the book is about.
Yeah, so I'm Pittsburgh based, and Pittsburgh is home to St. Anthony's Chapel, which houses the largest collection of relics outside of the Vatican. They have relics from more than 5,000 saints on display. The priest who started the chapel was an avid collector, which is and he built the chapel initially to house his collection, but it quickly became a secondary repository as wars were fought in Europe to consolidate Italy into a single country, or to consolidate Germany into a single country, up through including the Second World War. Relics were shipped over here for safekeeping, to make sure that there would always be a relic of some of these important saints. And the book is intended to help people get the most out of a visit to the chapel. It's little sketches strung together to tell stories about 20 different saints whose relics you will find, or some of the relics you will find on display at the chapel. I found if you go there, of course, they have a tour. The tour is wonderful, but in 20 minutes or 30 minutes or whatever, they can only hit the with 5,000 saint relics. You're not gonna cover it. So there was all this really interesting stuff. I mean, if you go just 3/4 of the way to the chapel, and on the right there's a skull. That is the skull of St. Theodore Stratolitis, a Roman general who converted to Christianity and was beheaded for it. And it's found its way to Pittsburgh. And nobody, I mean, not nobody, but it's not part of the tour. So it's not something that, people go to the chapel, they walk right by it, they look at it, they have no idea what that is. And so, I felt that there was a need for something that would help people better prepare for their, trip to the chapel so they could get the most out of it. That's what the book is about.
Okay, so that's The Saints of the Chapel, Thrilling Tales of History's Holiest Heroes, for anyone who's interested in that book. And if you find yourself in the Pittsburgh area, whether you live there or if you are visiting, pay a visit to downtown Pittsburgh and to St. Anthony's Chapel, and come armed with the book if you can, and hopefully your visit there will be a bit more enlightened. Now, Chris, before we close up, what's going on as far as down the road? What do you have in the works? What's coming up for you?
Well, COVID has really impacted my ability to do live storytelling.
Sure. Yeah.
So I'm the lecturer for my local Knights of Columbus Council. I'm involved in a men's group. So I'm doing a lot of Zoom presentations these days. And I am working, I'll have to see where this goes. I've been working on a trivia book about the saints. I mean, a true trivia book, like what's the scientific mystery behind St. Galgano's sword, or which English soccer club was John Paul II a fan of, and why, and I'm just accumulating. I mean, as I do research about the saints, I come across that kind of information, and I'm compiling it. And when I have enough to have a book length manuscript, then I expect that'll probably be my next publication.
Well, I wish you well on that project. I think it'll be another good addition to the world of Catholic literature. And, just to kind of reiterate something you said earlier, I think something like that is a good way to sort of humanize the saints. I agree with you that I think a lot of times we sort of put them into a particular category, and we think of the big doctors of the church, and we think, oh, well, they're just all, hyper intelligent, hyper theologians, and I have nothing to relate to them. But someone like you that's helping to sort of break the saints down into more human, more personable people, I definitely think is a great asset, so that all of us can come to learn more of the saints, but also feel like we can relate to them a bit more.
Yeah, I agree. I think they're a wonderfully fascinating subject. They all came to be recognized as saints for a reason. So there's always a story there, and many of them are just fascinating people. And you can't tell the story, or you can't hear the story. If you think about someone like Saint Tarcisius, who was a 13-year-old boy who endured a fatal beating rather than let the Eucharist touch the ground, right? You can't tell that story or hear that story without reflecting on the real presence and what the Eucharist means. And so the catechesis comes across just in the telling of the story. And that's so that I think that this is material that's been around forever, but we need to dust it off and find interesting ways to present it to a new audience.
Well, this time in our history is definitely a good time to look to great people that have come and gone, and something positive, people that are positive, that have done great things, that continue to do great things in heaven still. Definitely a good time for us to look to the saints. Christopher, do you have a website or something that people could look more information about you if they wanted?
I am the Saint Story Guy on Facebook, and contact information is there. I'm the Saint Story Guy at gmail.com. That's all written like one word if somebody wanted to reach out to me.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, you heard that on Facebook, the Saint Story Guy, or the Saint Story Guy at gmail.com. We also have Christopher's works at our website, waobaudiotheater.org. If you go to the contributor bios and look up Christopher Reibold, you can see what he's contributed, his writings, as well as his voice. And we hope that Christopher will be able to continue to provide more lives of the saints in many different forms for many people for some time to come. Christopher, thanks so much for being with us for this episode.
Yes, thank you very much for having me.
Ladies and gentlemen, so glad that you've joined us. I hope that you will tune in again for the next episode. Until then, be good, stay safe, peace.